Very exciting. Today we are in chapter 13. We are actually going to do the whole Mark of the Beast thing. Many of you are going to be disappointed. It's not as cryptic as it seems. I did want to go back because when we talk about this and chapter 13, and we're going to lay out a case. I'm going to lay out a case for what 666 means, and it's going to be different than some of the things that many of you have heard. And I think that the evidence that's provided will show you that it is likely that this interpretation is correct. I'm going to leave you with that just as a thing. But I want to go back, and I've had several conversations over the last week about future aspects and about persecution and things like that. And we're going to get into that with this lesson. So I kind of wanted to go back and reiterate. So if you'll remember way back when we did chapter 5, right? And we talked about Jesus taking the throne and all of that in chapter 5. And then if you'll remember, we talked about chapters 4. Chapter 4, if you remember, was the picture of God on his throne. And then you had chapter 5, you had Jesus coming on the throne. And so you had those two ideas of Jesus and God melded together, right? So that, spoiler alert, Jesus is God, right? I mean, we all know that, obviously, but that's kind of the point there. And so, and the important thing was we talked about Daniel, and we talked about the prophecies of Daniel, and if you remember, I said that there were 14 points of contact between chapters 4 and 5 and Daniel 7. And then we talked about John, the author of the book here, sees Jesus and the whole Jesus event, which when I say the Jesus event, I mean his death and resurrection and ascension to the right hand of God and the throne and all of that. John sees that as the fulfillment of Daniel 7, okay? And then since then, we've talked about Daniel's 3.5 years, and I'm not going to go back through all that. We've gone through it several times, and what the days and they all mean basically the same time period. But again, John sees that 3.5 years of persecution from Daniel. He sees that as the time after Christ is ascended to heaven. It's there after Christ. And then we did chapter 12, if you remember last week. Chapter 12, we had the woman clothed with the sun and the stars and the moon and all of that. And we said that she's faithful Israel. That would be, think of it as all believers of all time. But going now as into the church. The church does not replace Israel. It is grafted in, as Paul describes. And so the faithful believers, those people who believe in Jesus today as the Messiah, that is Israel. That is faithful, what we refer to as faithful Israel, okay? And so you had the woman, and then the beast, the dragon comes after, which technically a beast and a dragon are the same thing as you're going to see today. We talked about dragons last week and the ancient understanding of dragons and how dragons are used in Daniel and Revelation. So then you have, once the woman she gives birth, and Jesus is the child that she gives birth to, and then he's taken to heaven. And then what happens directly after that? The dragon is sent down to earth. Satan is the dragon, is sent down to earth and begins persecuting God's people. So again, the book is clear that after Jesus is ascended to heaven, the church is persecuted, starting at that moment. And again, and this is the most important thing about the book, and if you lose sight of this, then that's when we start getting crazy, okay? The book of Revelation was written to people who lived 2,000 years ago. Clearly in chapters 2 and 3, it says that it's written to them, to 7 actual churches who are actually being persecuted under an actual emperor, right? And so it's written to those people to provide them with comfort. But the message is, you're going to be persecuted. And they live in a very close time of, Jesus' ascension into heaven. And so again, this time of persecution that we're talking about is a time of persecution over the church age itself, of the whole time the Christian church is here and as they go out to do their missionary work. Again, in the United States, and I don't mean to be down on the United States, because obviously I love the United States, but we're a little spoiled in the United States. And we look and we say, well, I don't see that kind of persecution. You're right. You don't see that kind of persecution. I don't see that kind of persecution, because we're just not really persecuted like that in the United States. Now, there are certainly different types of persecution in the United States against Christians. And at different times, I'm not going to get into any politics, but at different times it gets worse and better at different times. But look around you. It's not just about the United States. It's about the rest of the world. Look at the rest of the world in China, where people are actually being persecuted right now. People are dying for Christianity. Look over in Muslim countries where Christians are being killed and persecuted. So that's the thing. When we look around and we say, well, this can't be talking about now because we're not being persecuted. It's not just about us. We live in I don't want to say we're blessed over and above. And I'll be honest with you. Sometimes it's not a blessing. Because, again, when you're not persecuted, and I'm not asking for persecution, just for the record, but when we're not being persecuted, it is very easy to stand back and say, I don't need anything, and not to rely on God. Whereas those people in those foreign countries who are being persecuted, they see it, and they still cling to God, right? So that's a show of faith. And so I just want to be very careful. There are absolutely future aspects in this book. But it's not all future. It's not like these people in the first century opened the book of Revelation and said, well, this isn't about us. This is about people that's going to live, way after us. And so we have to be very, very careful how we interpret it, as though it's only going to happen to some future generation. Persecution has been happening since Jesus all the way until now. Again, even though we may not always see it. And again, if you look, think about during the Reformation, right? And I'll be honest with you, I used to, when I did, before I did church history, I looked at, the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church, if you translated a verse into English or whatever your language was that wasn't Latin or Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic, Latin was their Bible basically, and because it was a translation, done in the 4th century. And so, but if you wrote out in English, let's say I'm sitting, and I know Latin, and so I like the verse. I'm like, I wonder what that would be in English, and I write it out. I could be killed for that, because they did not want anyone to interpret the Bible differently than the church, right? And so I used to look at them and I think, God, they used to torture people and do all these terrible things to people. God, how terrible was the Catholic Church? And they absolutely were terrible. But guess what? During the Protestant Reformation, they did the same thing. And so throughout history, Christians have persecuted Christians. During this time, it's the empire is persecuting Christians. Christians have suffered persecution throughout church's history in ways that we could not imagine. And I told you the story about a woman who was persecuted in the at the end of the 2nd century, and she refused to worship the emperor. And so what happened? Well, she was thrown to wild beasts and such, and she tells her story, and she talks about how, she had a baby, and that's one thing I didn't tell you last time because I was afraid I wouldn't get through the whole thing, and I'm just going to be general now because I don't want to get caught up in it again. But, she had a baby, and she was nursing the baby in this prison, and, her dad came and begged her, just make the sacrifice. And again, the point is simply to sacrifice to the emperor. And we look at it today and we think, well, that's so foolish. Surely there was more to it than that. No, there was not. That's what she was being forced to do. And because she refused to do it, they put her into the Colosseum. She was first trampled by bulls, and then they sent lions out after them. Okay? And so that, again, is for simply not worshiping the emperor. So we are very comfortable in the United States. And so I don't want that comfort to make us think, well, this can't possibly be talking about the church age or the past, because we've not seen persecution yet. Well, it's not just about us. It's about the whole Christian church, and over long periods of time where different groups have been persecuted. And in this time period, we're talking about the people who were persecuted under the empire in the first century. That's what the book of Revelation is originally written about. And so as we go through this, you're going to raise an eyebrow and you're like, I don't know if this is it. But I think, again, as we get through to the end, you're going to see it. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a spoiler alert. Nero is the Antichrist prototype, okay? He is the prototypical Antichrist figure, and this is the way it works. Nero was the first persecutor of Christians in the between 60 and 68. He was vicious, and we're going to talk about the things that he did so you can get an idea of the types of things he did. But this book wasn't written during the reign of Nero. Nero was good and dead by then. But it was written during the reign of Domitian, and people believe that Domitian was a second Nero. But it's not just about Domitian either. It's about future rulers who will persecute Christians, and culminating in, yes, very potentially culminating in a be-all, end-all Antichrist figure, right? But note that James talks about several Antichrists. He doesn't talk about it as one Antichrist figure. So we keep looking for an Antichrist figure, but there are several Antichrist figures. For us, we would look and we would say something like Hitler. Like if you wanted to talk about the worst possible persecutor of people in general, you might talk about Hitler or Stalin, right? So we can refer to Hitler or Stalin. But does that mean that there will never be another Hitler or Stalin? Absolutely not. There absolutely will be, right? Somewhere at some time, whether it may be, I don't know if there's anybody Hitler right now, but I mean, maybe there is, right? And so we're going to go through and I'm going to show you in this chapter that Nero is again the prototype. It doesn't mean that Nero, of course, is the be-all, end-all Antichrist. But he is clearly the mold. He fits the mold for what an Antichrist figure looks like. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So Nero, note that he was the emperor from 54 to 68. Between 54 and 59, strangely enough, he was a great emperor. He was in legal matters. He believed in justice for all people, including the poor. He did all kinds of things to pay soldiers and to make sure that people were generally happy. And I think generally scholars will say that it's because he wanted to be liked. But regardless of why he did it, he was a good guy. Well, he ended up killing his mother, which we'll talk about that briefly. And it seems to be that after he killed his mother or had his mother killed, he kind of started to go off the deep end. And he went off the deep end big time. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time on the golden years because that's, of course, not as exciting. We're going to talk about his descent into madness. So Nero was interesting because he was not really a military leader at all. He wasn't at all. He enjoyed the arts. And so he liked to sing and he liked to do theatrical things. And so he would actually sneak out in the middle of the night. He would go out to clubs, what we would call clubs, but not really clubs. But he would go out on the streets and he would act in disguise and stuff. And so, of course, you know, the officials and such, they were like, this is crazy. He definitely should not be doing that. And he set up all these competitions so that he could enter competitions, and then, of course, he would win all of them. I want to say that at one time he set up like 1,800 competitions that he went on tour, and he won all of them, right? Of course, because nobody's going to beat the emperor, because he would kill you if you did, right? And so, you know. Ken, I don't know if you've ever sang in a competition, but I'm assuming that if there was a threat that you would kill anyone who beat you, then you'd probably win them all. Not that you're not good, but that would definitely weigh it in your favor. And he did. He sometimes would kill his competition if he felt like he was going to lose. And listen, it's always weird to say some of the stuff from the pulpit. Again, I'm a teacher, and I say this stuff to high school students. So some of the things here are obviously weird, but it's just historical fact, okay? So he did attempt incest with his mother, right? And the people near him said, hey, no, don't do that. And so he actually dressed a concubine as his mother, and then was there with his concubine and stuff. So this is partially, and you're going to get, the language may not get worse, but the ideas get worse. He also married 2 men who he had castrated. He married them, and then he paraded them through the city as women, dressed as women. But then later, he married a guy named Pythagoras, and this is not Pythagoras of the Pythagorean theory, but this time during the wedding, he dressed as the bride, okay? So this guy clearly had lots of issues. He was also married to women. One wife he just had murdered. Another wife who was one of his favorites, she was pregnant, and he actually kicked her to death, okay, while she was pregnant. His mother, he tried to kill her several ways. And as Craig Keener said, he killed his mother, which is generally frowned upon, but his mother was a little out of hand and somebody needed to do something about her. She's the reason that he came to power. And she killed his uncle and several other people, his uncle's son, because the son would have been the emperor. So she had him killed as well. She poisoned several people to get him to be the emperor. And then, ironically, he ends up killing her. But strangely, he had several different ways to kill her. One way was he had the ceiling in her bedroom rigged up to where it would fall in on her bed, so it would kill her. But that didn't work. So then he had her sent out on a boat, and then the boat was supposed to sink. But that didn't work either. So he eventually just had her clubbed to death. Okay, and he had her clubbed to death because she was too critical of him. Okay, so again, not a nice guy. He also bankrupted the empire. And when he needed money, since he had bankrupted the empire, he withheld pay from his soldiers, okay, which is not a good thing. If you rely on your soldiers to keep you in power, you probably don't want to cut their pay. That's never good. He confiscated property from the wealthy in Rome, and he robbed shrines and temples of gold and different implements and things that they had that were valuable. The big thing that he did regarding Christians was there was an area of Rome that he wanted to renovate. And so, of course, the people lived there. And so they were like, well, no, we don't want you to tear down our area, our city, our part of the city. And so, miraculously, it caught on fire in several different places at the same time. And so, clearly, it seemed that Nero did it. And so many people believed him to be the one who perpetrated the fire. And so he needed someone to scapegoat, and so he scapegoated this evil band of religious nuts, the Christians, right? Because that's the way the Romans looked at them. And we look at it and we think, well, I mean, Christians have always been nice people. Why would they hate Christians? Well, they hated Christians, and they thought that they ate flesh, and they drank blood because, of course, Jesus' body and his blood and all of that. There were many rumors about Christians that they were just terrible people. That's why in Paul's letters, oftentimes you get things like men can't have long hair because that was associated with temple prostitution, so you didn't want that. Women wearing jewelry and things like that was also considered temple prostitution. And so Paul made sure that Christians were not perceived in negative lights. And so that's why when we look at those things, we said those things are cultural. Like most women here wear makeup and jewelry and stuff. You don't have a problem with that. And that's right, because it was a cultural issue because that was something they were dealing with. So we know from several different places the way Christians were treated. But one of the better sources that kind of fleshes it out about the fire is Tacitus. And I did actually make the slides for this, just so you could kind of read along, because it's a decent amount, but it's not too much. So this is after he tried to convince people that he didn't do it, Nero. He didn't set the fire. This is what happens. It says, but neither human help nor imperial munificence nor all the modes of placating heaven. So in other words, he sacrificed all the gods to make everybody happy, and that didn't work. People still blamed him for the fire. Could stifle scandal or dispel the belief that the fire had taken place by an order of Nero. Therefore, to scotch the rumor, Nero substituted as culprits and punished with the utmost refinements of cruelty a class of men loathed for their vices, whom the crowd styled Christians. Christians, sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't going to be able to read that. Is it Christus? Oh yeah, Christus. Christus, the founder of the name, had undergone the death penalty in the reign of Tiberius by sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilate. So just for the record, again, there's some historical evidence outside the Bible for Jesus, and just for the record, in case anybody ever says something to you. Jesus definitely lived, no matter what. Jesus absolutely lived. And the pernicious superstition was checked for a moment, only to break out once more, not merely in Judea, the home of the disease, note Christianity referred to as a disease, but in the capital itself, where all things horrible or shameful in the world collect and find a vogue. First, then, the confessed members of the sect were arrested. Next, on their disclosures, vast numbers were convicted, not so much on the count of arson as for hatred of the human race. So they hated the human race because they refused to worship the pagan gods and the emperor. And derision accompanied their end. They were covered with wild beast skins and torn to death by dogs, or they were fastened on crosses, and when daylight failed, were burned to serve as lamps by night. Nero had offered his gardens for the spectacle and gave an exhibition in the circus, mixing with the crowd in the habit of a charioteer or mounted on his car. Hence, in spite of a guilt which had earned the most exemplary punishment, there arose a sentiment of pity due to the impression that they were being sacrificed not for the welfare of the state, but to the ferocity. And that did not finish that. Sorry. The ferocity of a single man, being Nero, right? So even people began to look on Christians and say, well, you know what? They're being unfairly punished for this, because again, people pretty much felt like Nero had done it. But this is the first state-sponsored, if you will, persecution of Christians. And so therefore, Nero was always believed to be the most evil up to this point through the whole biblical time period. Again, note that Nero also had Paul beheaded, and, well, I won't say that Nero personally had it done, but it was done under Nero's reign. Paul was beheaded, and Peter was crucified, right? So this all happened under Rome. So again, Nero was the poster child for evil empire. Note that there were 2 assassination attempts on Nero in 65, and then later, in response, he ended up having all of those people closest to him killed, including Seneca, the famous philosopher who was his tutor. And he didn't have the heart to have Seneca killed, so he convinced Seneca that it would be better for himself if he killed himself. And so he convinced Seneca to commit suicide so that he didn't have to kill him. His military and most of his servants deserted him, and he was forced to flee. He eventually fled to a small cottage with just a very few people who still supported him. Those with him encouraged him to commit suicide, because that's what you did in the ancient world. If you were going to get captured, you'd much rather commit suicide than be captured, because they would do terrible things to you. And so he actually asked someone else to kill him, which was also fairly standard, but they said, no, we're not going to do that. And then he asked, would one of you commit suicide first so that I can see how it's done? And they were like, nope, we're not doing that either. And so he brought 2 daggers with him, and he stabbed himself in the throat because he did not know how to commit suicide. And so he did what I cannot imagine, but he just stabbed himself in the throat, okay? They took him out and buried him so that the people that were coming to kill him could not do anything with his body. And since there was no body, people started to believe that he had escaped. And the vast majority of beliefs were that he went over to Parthia. And if you'll remember from chapter 9, we talked about the Parthians. And the Parthians were the one group who could defeat the Romans. And so chapter 9 is, the background of that is Parthia and the possibility that even Parthia could destroy Rome. And so you shouldn't put your faith into in Rome, because again, even the Parthians might be able to defeat them. Note, and there are several sources, Jewish, Christian, and Roman, which state that that Nero would come back. Some of them believed that he would return from the dead, but others believed again that he was away and he was in Parthia and that he would come back. There were pretenders, because it was such a popular myth that pretenders showed up. One, within a year of his death, showed up and said that he was Nero, and he looked like Nero, and so some of the soldiers actually followed him. One person claimed to be Nero in 88 and actually gained the support of the Parthians and led them into Asia Minor, which is the area that we're studying. And if you will remember, 88 is right around the time that the book of Revelation is written. It's probably written into the early 90s. And so again, this is the background of all the things that are going on. Christians expected a new Nero, referring to him as a great beast, right? So again, you kind of see some themes that we're going to be going through here. Note again that Nero is the prototype of an Antichrist figure. It doesn't mean that he's the be-all, end-all Antichrist, and it does not mean that we believe that Nero is going to come back to life and be the Antichrist, okay? It's just like when we talk about Elijah. And note that Jews believed that Elijah was going to come back to life, right? And so did Elijah literally come back to life? No, but did Elijah return in some way, according to the New Testament? Absolutely, through John the Baptist, right? So John the Baptist is a new Elijah, just like there will be a new Nero, right? Note that Domitian and all other dictators who persecute Christians are seen as types of Nero or Antichrist figures. Nero is the poster child for the spirit of Antichrist and the evil empire, and that's the point of the chapter. So note that in chapter 12, the dragon made war on the offspring of the woman, which we talked about is the church. And chapter 13 is going to explain how that takes place, okay? And interestingly, just for the record, I know that was a whole bunch of background, but that's most of the explanation that you will need. Most of the rest of it will just be like, see, this is how this fits. And I saw a beast, this is starting at 13:1. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. Sorry. Note that this beast is like the dragon, right? So it looks like the dragon. So it's the same description, basically, as the dragon in the previous chapter. So it's beast, dragon, or a similar thing. As with the dragon, of course, this beast is a composite of all 4 beasts in Daniel. And like the beasts in Daniel, this beast represents a nation or an empire, and that nation is Rome, okay? Rome from then, not Rome for today or Rome in the future, okay? It's Rome from their day. Because again, this is written to people who are suffering under Rome. So it would be weird to talk about something way in the future to comfort those people, because it's for them to be comforted. Certainly comforts us today, but it was written first to them. Note that the beast is from the sea, right? And residents of Asia Minor would have absolutely recognized that Rome came from the sea, okay? Parody. So this is where we start getting into some of our parodies. What is a parody? A parody is an imitation of something that is exaggerated. It is something that you exaggerate it in order to make a joke out of it, right? Think Saturday Night Live presidential debates. If you've ever watched those, because hopefully you watch presidential debates, right? Some of you may not. I like to watch them. I don't know, I'm a nerd, so I like to watch presidential debates. And if you ever watch the Saturday Night Live debates, when I teach parody in English classes, I go back and we'll watch the older versions, like of Carter and Ford and things like that. They've had some good parodies. And so they do the debates, they talk about the things that the real people talked about, but then they way over-exaggerate it to make those two people look foolish, right? That's what a parody is. Parody. Note that God gives authority to the Son previously, but note here that Satan gives authority to the beast, Rome, the empire, right? And so you have a parody of God giving authority to the Son way back in chapter 5, and here you have Satan giving authority to the beast, which again stands for Rome. The blasphemous names of chapter 1, note that Domitian, who is the emperor during this time, he referred to himself as Son of God or God, and he demanded the title Lord and God. And so that would be blasphemous names. It's blasphemous for him to call himself God, obviously. Notice another parody involved here. You have the 7-horned lamb previously, but now you have the 10-horned beast, right? So you're going to notice a pattern of the things that God does, or the ways that God and Jesus are described are going to be parodied by the beast. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. Note the parody here. The wound refers to most likely the wound that Nero gave himself when he stabbed himself in the throat. Christ was crucified and raised from the dead. Now Nero was stabbed in the throat and believed to be dead, but now he is back, right? So again, it's not literally Nero, but it's that whole idea. It's like, hey, the prototypical Antichrist figure is back in the form of Domitian, right? But think how bad it got under Nero. That's the point being made here. And they worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who can fight against it? This is another parody. Who is like the beast and who can fight against it is a parody of Exodus 15:11 and sayings about God, where at Exodus 15:11 it says this, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders, right? So again, we have a parody where the empire is trying to say that they're like God. And we just talked about the blasphemous names where the emperor, Domitian, refers to himself as God. Again here, it may seem that the empire is all-powerful, but it is not. It is simply following the beast who gives it its power, right? And so worship of the beast, worship of the empire is actually Satan worship. That's the point being made. If you're worshiping the beast or the empire, remember in the letters to the 7 churches, we're talking about worshiping either the pagan gods so that you can join trade guilds and make money, or worshiping the emperor so that you can find comfort and not get persecuted. Neither of those is an acceptable way to get out of persecution. It is not okay. It is not okay to give up your Christian ideals and beliefs in order to suffer, to prevent suffering. The book of Revelation clearly says from beginning to end that you will suffer as a Christian. And you may be killed, but you have to stay faithful because it's not this world you're concerned about, it's everlasting life. So what's the answer to the question, who is like the beast and who can fight against it? The King of Kings, right? The King of Kings can fight against the beast. That's the answer to the question. And that's the point. The point of this chapter is, who are you going to worship? The beast or the King of Kings, right? 13:5. And the beast was given a mouth to utter haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. And we've talked about, if you haven't heard that, then go back and look at the last couple or 3 lessons, and we talked about 42 months, 1,260 days, 3.5 years. We talked about all that, but it equals the church age, which is the time between Jesus' first coming and his second coming. 13:6. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blasphemy against his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. So the dwelling, remember, the dwelling is symbolic. It is made up of God's people, right? It's symbolic of believers. This blasphemy is going to be the slander against Christians. And again, if you go back to the letters to the 7 churches, that's a major theme, is slander against Christians that lead them to be persecuted. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. Again, this is persecution of the church. And but notice that authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. Who gives ultimate allowance for the beast to act? God. Satan is the one who is directing actions, but God allows it, right? And that becomes clear as we go through. Again, if that causes you issue, think about in the Old Testament. I always go back because I always think, that doesn't seem right. Go back to the Old Testament. Testing of Job, right? Clearly, right there, bam. You have that. You have the Assyrians and the Babylonians who are used by God. He allows them. He doesn't force them to go and punish his people, but he allows them to do what they are naturally inclined to do, and so he allows them to go and punish his people, all right? And clearly, there are places where he says that he sent the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Even if you look at Job chapter 1 and 2, in chapter 1, they make the deal, and he says, okay, you can do it. Satan clearly is the one who goes and does the things. But then in chapter 2, what does God say? He says, you had me lift my finger against Job for no reason. Well, but wait a minute. Chapter 1 said Satan did it. Well, again, that's because God allowed Satan to do it. And so that's the point. God does not create evil, but he does allow evil characters to do what they are inclined to do. Again, Judas Iscariot would be another example. And all who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. Again, notice you have a choice. You can either worship God or you can worship the empire. You cannot walk a middle line. 13:9. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. Again, persecution. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. The saints are those who are faithful. It is the saints who are going to be persecuted. All right? The saints are going to be persecuted. So again, the church is definitely going to be persecuted. So the point is to be prepared to suffer, right? And that is a message for all times, just for the record. Like when I talk about it, it's written to them first, but it also applies to us today. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. Okay, so just for the record, beast 1 is going to be the empire represented by the emperor, okay? Beast 2 is going to represent the pagan priesthood of both the emperor and the pagan gods. They're the ones who force you to worship the pagan gods and the emperor, okay? Note that you have another parody here. You have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and you have the dragon and the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth, right? So you have another parody of you have what God does in the Holy Trinity, and then you have what Satan does in the unholy Trinity. Notice another parody. You have the Lamb of God who speaks the word of God, right? But then you have the second beast with 2 horns like a lamb, but he speaks the words of Satan, right? It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. Again, the priesthood. And we think, well, we don't have a big priesthood of Satan worshipers around here. No, but in the ancient world, they had tons, and they would walk around and they would force you to worship the emperor or the pagan gods. Again, we have to look at it in their context, not our context. It is foreign to us because it's 2,000 years ago in a place that most of us have never even been to even today, right? And so it's foreign. It's a foreign context. Notice, it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound was healed. Again, a reference to Nero. And listen, again, I gave you all that context at the beginning, and again, it's hard for us to look back because, many of you probably never heard of Nero before, right? But in the first century, right at this time, when you've just had a pretender come out and lead the Parthians into this territory, this would be like first on their list. Like they would recognize every bit of this, right? This is not foreign to them. They knew what this stuff was, and they would have absolutely recognized this in their time period. Again, we're far removed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. So note, this is going to be like a reference to Elijah when he, brought fire down when he was in the battle with the priests of Baal. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. So why are we making images of the emperor who was killed, right? And it's this whole idea of, And if you'll remember, and this was an important point earlier, we talked about the book of Revelation it doesn't see evil as different evils. Like, oh, there's an evil that's cropped up and then we fix it. And then, oh, there's a totally disconnected evil, then it goes away. And then there's No, in the book of Revelation, John sees all evil is interconnected, right? All evil throughout all time is interconnected. So that's why you can have this jump between references to Nero, but referred to Domitian, who is the current emperor. Because again, all evil's related anyway. It's not separate events. It is all one big conspiracy, if you will, by Satan in order to trip up God's people. That's the way John sees it. Telling them to make an image for what we did all that. Okay. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Notice that giving breath, breathing life into idols was a thing, right? There was a whole magic involved in that. Ancient sources describe several tricks used to make idols move, speak, or even breathe fire. Emperors would employ machines to make their idols hurl thunder like Zeus. And the practice of theurgy, right? Theurgy, you've all heard of that, of course. Theurgy is the whole magic, the set of magic spells and such involved in breathing life into statues and making statues take the embodiment of the god. In this case, of course, the emperor. Also, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead. This is a problem because today we have all kinds of theories about chips implanted in your head or your hand, and they can certainly do that. Just for the record, they can do that, and you can scan into different things, and you can put your credit card on it, whatever. But that's not what this is about. This is another parody, right? And we talked about this before. But remember way back when we talked about the 144,000, and when they look back at the background of that, which was Ezekiel, which was clearly not a literal mark. It just means those who are faithful, God knows his people. They are marked by their faithfulness, right? So note that those 144,000 are marked by their allegiance to God, right? And they're not literal marks. Well, these are marked by their allegiance to Satan. It is not, again, a literal mark. So we're not looking for, we're not looking for a chip, right? If you don't follow God and you follow Satan, you're already marked. I hate to tell you, but you already have the mark. Now, hopefully that obviously doesn't apply to any of you, but so why does it say the hand and the forehead? Well, because slaves were marked on the forehead and soldiers were marked on the hand. And so the point there being that your allegiance, whether it be as a slave of Satan or as a soldier for Satan, your allegiance is marked. And again, God doesn't need an official mark to know. So that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. And again, we look at that and we say, well, it must be a future thing because I've never seen anything like that. Well, they absolutely had in the first century because every time they got a coin, it said, Domitian, the divine son of Augustus Caesar, or Nero, the divine son of Augustus Caesar, or you had coins with Domitian and Zeus on the other side that clearly equated him with God. And so again, that's the point. In order to buy and sell, you had to go to the trade guilds, you had to worship the pagan gods, you had to get the coins that had emperor as God on it. All of that is blasphemy, every bit of it. Okay, so again, it's not your credit cards and it's not stuff like that. It's anything that you do that you buy into a system that is anti-Christian, right? Anti-Christ. That's the point. It's not a big, scary, whatever. It's scary because it's already happening and we don't know it. We look at it as, well, this is a future thing. No, you need to be scared now because you need to make sure your allegiance is in the right place. It was a present reality for them, all right? Oh, Okay. I didn't do the slide. So that no one can buy or sell, and that's that, okay? And then last, the most exciting thing ever. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Who was this book written to? People in the first century. Who is it telling to calculate the number of the beast? The people in the first century, right? That's the thing. It would make no sense to write this to a group of people and say, well, listen, you calculate the number of the beast. Just a joke, and you can't calculate the number of the beast because the beast is not going to show up for 2,000 more years. That would make no sense, right? And so what does all this mean? It states right there that the original audience could calculate the number of the beast. There are two ways, there's three ways actually. One of them has to deal with triangular numbers, and I teach English, and I don't teach math, so I'm not going to get into that. And I really, all joking aside, I don't think it's more important than these other things, I'm not going to go into an explanation. You can look up 666 and triangular numbers if you choose. But one is that 666 is less than the perfect 777, right? And as we talk about gematria here afterwards, note that Jesus equals 888. And so it's like saying that it's less than perfect. Again, that's one way to look at it, and it could certainly fall into that. But the more obvious answer here is that it's Hebrew gematria, okay? Now, the book is written in Greek, right? But note that you have Armageddon, which is explained as a Hebrew term. You have Apollyon and Abaddon, which is explained as a Hebrew term. So the book clearly expects the readers to understand some Hebrew language stuff. You know what gematria is. You know Latin gematria. It is Super Bowl. What Super Bowl did we just have? I don't know, 50-something or whatever. So how do you do 55? It's L, right? And then a V, right? Isn't that right? 55. That's 55. A C is 100, right? And so you have letters that represent numbers, and you didn't have numbers by themselves, right? So Hebrew, Greek, Latin, they don't have numbers. They just have letters, and so letters represent numbers. So if you calculate up the name Nero Caesar, which is the Latinized way to say it, it equals 666, okay? People calculated Nero's name in several different ways in Greek. Note that he killed his mother, and there was a saying, and it was written in gematria, or it was something about Nero. He killed his mother. Calculate, it's the same. And so if you do Nero and he killed his mother, they both equal out to be the same number in Greek, right? 666 also equals beast, right? So you're saying it equals Nero, it equals beast. And then for some people, they said, no, Nero Caesar, that's not the normal way you would say it. You would say Nero Caesar, right? You wouldn't add the N on the end. And so interestingly, again, clearly early people knew that because we also have early texts of the book of Revelation where the number is not 666, it is 616. And the reason it's 616 is because somebody agreed and they said, hey, it's not Nero Caesar, it's Nero Caesar. So the number should be 616. And they actually changed the number to match what they thought it should be. Now, the real number is 666, and that reflects Nero Caesar. Again, the point here is that Nero is the prototype of the Antichrist. He is the type of character that you're looking for when you talk about an Antichrist figure. He is embodied in some large way in Domitian, because Domitian is a blasphemer for saying that he's God, and he forces people to worship him, and he kills people who do not. And so does his cult, which would be the priesthood. Any character afterward who persecutes Christians are based on a type of Nero, including the be-all, end-all Antichrist of the end times. That person will be, again, it will be a beast like Nero, okay? And so that's chapter 13. Thanks for watching, and please feel free to leave a comment or question. And if you found this video helpful, hit like. And if you would like to be notified when new videos are released, hit subscribe and join us next time as we study the Bible in context.